The wasteland stretched endlessly under the burning twilight sky, a tapestry of rust-colored sand and weathered stone. Ethan Cormack stood at the entrance of his reinforced shelter, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun sank into the earth's embrace. The fading amber light cast long shadows across the barren terrain, finally releasing the land from the day's merciless heat. Ethan savored these moments of tranquility. After the chaos of military service, the desolation of the Badlands offered a sanctuary few could appreciate. No commands, no gunfire, just a gentle whisper of wind across sand. The serenity shattered in an instant. A blinding flash erupted overhead, followed by a thunderous roar that seemed to split the sky. A blazing object tore through the atmosphere, trailing fire and smoke like a comet's tail. Ethan tracked its descent, heart hammering against his ribs as the object crashed beyond the distant ridge with an earth-shaking impact that sent birds scattering from the sparse trees. "Definitely not a meteorite," Ethan muttered, squinting at the plume of dust rising from the impact site. Years of military training triggered an immediate response. He grabbed his emergency pack, slipped a weathered combat knife into his boot, and slung his modified pulse rifle across his back, a precaution he hoped was unnecessary. Within minutes, he was speeding across the Badlands on his rugged terrain vehicle, dust billowing in his wake. The journey took nearly 40 minutes, navigating treacherous terrain until he spotted the billowing smoke, thick black clouds spiraling skyward like a beacon. As he approached, the acrid smell of scorched metal and unfamiliar chemicals stung his nostrils. The ground beneath his tires radiated heat, forcing him to slow his approach. What awaited him defied explanation. Half buried in the scorched earth lay a vessel unlike anything manufactured on Earth, sleek, pearlescent, with elegant curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal. Sections of the craft still pulsed with a soft emerald luminescence, highlighting the extent of the damage. "If this is some classified government project, they've seriously upgraded their tech," he whispered, cautiously approaching the wreckage. Then he heard it, a faint melodic sound, almost like singing but laced with pain. Following the sound, he carefully navigated the debris field until he found the source. Lying beside a fractured section of hull, partially enveloped in a shimmering force field that flickered like dying starlight, was a woman, but not human. Her skin was a soft azure, glowing faintly in the gathering darkness. Her hair, reminiscent of spun platinum with subtle iridescent highlights, was matted with sand and what appeared to be blood, deep indigo instead of red. Her damaged exosuit revealed multiple injuries, the worst being a deep gash across her side leaking indigo fluid. Ethan stood frozen, disbelief wrestling with the evidence before his eyes. This wasn't an elaborate hoax or military experiment. The being before him was genuinely extraterrestrial. The alien woman stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips as one arm reached weakly toward him. That broke Ethan's paralysis. He rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "Hey, can you understand me? You're going to be okay," he said, uncertain if his words held any meaning for her. He checked her vital signs. Her skin was unnaturally cool to the touch, her breathing shallow and labored. Her eyelids fluttered open slightly, revealing irises that shimmered like liquid amber. She spoke, her voice melodic despite her obvious pain, in a language filled with musical tones and harmonics impossible for human vocal cords. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the desperation was unmistakable. "I'm going to help you," he reassured her, removing his jacket to create a makeshift compression bandage for her worst injury. The indigo blood had a strange scent, like ozone mixed with something reminiscent of copper. She watched him work, confusion and gratitude mingling in her amber eyes. "Nevaleth Vora," she whispered, her hand weakly touching his wrist before her eyes closed again. Ethan didn't hesitate. Despite her alien physiology making her heavier than her slender frame suggested, he carefully lifted her and secured her on his vehicle. As they traveled back to his shelter, he kept glancing at her face, struck by how vulnerable she appeared despite her otherworldly origins. Not a threat, just a lost being in desperate need of help. His shelter was modest, a reinforced bunker powered by solar cells, consisting of a single room with basic amenities. Military efficiency defined the space: minimal furnishings, functional equipment, and a small medical station from his deployment days. He gently placed her on his cot, and began treating her wounds with his limited supplies, uncertain if human medical techniques would help in alien physiology, but determined to try. Hours passed as Ethan monitored her condition. Gradually, her breathing stabilized, her azure complexion regained its luminescence, and the strange energy field surrounding her body dissipated. He remained vigilant, watching for any sign of deterioration while questions tumbled through his mind. Who was she? How had she come to Earth? Was she alone? Just before dawn, her eyes opened fully, sweeping the unfamiliar surroundings before settling on Ethan with startling clarity. Fear flashed across her features, her body tensing. Ethan raised his hands in a universal gesture of peace. "You're safe," he said slowly, enunciating each word. Her expression shifted from fear to surprise. "You helped me," she replied, her accent exotic but the words clearly English. Ethan couldn't mask his astonishment. "You speak our language?" "Basic words. Learning still," she responded, her voice musical despite its hesitancy. "Translator? Damaged in crash." Ethan nodded, relieved at the prospect of communication. "Take it slow. You were badly injured." She examined the bandages covering her wounds, then looked back at him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his defenses. "Neveleth is my name. You saved my essence. Now we are Sharvanya." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean, Sharvanya?" Neveleth held his gaze for a long moment before responding. "In your words, eternally connected." Then she closed her eyes again, a serene expression settling over her features as though something monumental had been established. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a profound sense of change washing over him, as if invisible threads were weaving themselves between them, creating a connection he couldn't see but undeniably felt. Whatever had begun here reached far beyond a simple rescue, extending into territory he couldn't begin to comprehend. Through the night, Ethan maintained his vigil, watching the subtle fluctuations in Neveleth's azure skin. It wasn't just color, but a living luminescence that shifted like the surface of a tropical ocean, translucent waves of light cascading beneath her skin in rhythm with her breathing. This was no costume or elaborate disguise, but a fundamental difference in biological composition that no human technology could replicate. Morning brought renewed awareness. Neveleth attempted to sit up, grimacing as the movement aggravated her injuries. Ethan moved quickly to support her, but before he could reach her, her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Their eyes locked, a moment of tension hovering between them before her grip relaxed. "You are not enemy," she stated, her tone indicating she had only just confirmed this fact. Ethan couldn't help but smile slightly. "Took you long enough to figure that out." Her gaze traveled around the shelter, taking in the solar converters, communications equipment, and survival gear with evident curiosity. "You dwell here alone?" she asked, her vocabulary clearly expanding with each exchange. Ethan nodded. "I prefer solitude. It's peaceful." Neveleth studied him with penetrating intensity, as though reading information written beneath his skin. "You bear the marks of conflict," she observed, her fingertips hovering over the faded military insignia tattooed on his forearm. "Your spirit carries echoes of battle." Ethan instinctively pulled back, uncomfortable with her perception. "How can you tell?" "The Viridians see more than physical form. Energy patterns reveal truth. You fought, you survey, you carry sorrow," she explained, her words simple but laden with understanding. Ethan turned away. "That's behind me now." Neveleth tilted her head, studying him. "Then why preserve a warrior's reflexes in a place of peace, or image?" The question struck closer to home than he cared to admit. After a moment of silence, he replied, "Because sometimes peace needs protecting." She considered this, then asked the question he'd been anticipating. "Why save me when others of your kind would have claimed me as discovery?" Ethan met her gaze. "Because I've seen what happens when we treat the unknown as a threat instead of a possibility." Neveleth's expression softened into something akin to respect. He offered her water and nutrient bars, which she initially regarded with suspicion until he demonstrated they weren't harmful. She ate methodically like someone accustomed to rationing resources. As she consumed the simple meal, her attention fixed on the small thermal unit in the corner. This emanation, she said, it resonates differently here. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Different how? She placed a hand over her chest, fingers splayed. Among the Viridian, warmth is ceremonial, shared only during passage rites when warriors prepare for transformation. But this warmth feels, she paused, searching for the right word, nurturing, like the first light of Trellis Prime. Ethan found himself without response, so he simply refilled her water container. As twilight approached, Ethan constructed a fire pit outside the shelter. Desert nights brought bone-chilling cold, a stark contrast to the day's heat. Neveleth emerged slowly from the shelter, wrapped in one of Ethan's spare thermal garments, her movements careful but deliberate. Despite her injuries, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity, head elevated, posture straight, eyes alert. She settled beside the fire without invitation, watching the flames in silence. Several minutes passed before she spoke. You know meaning of Neveleth? Ethan glanced at her. Your name? No. It means one who journeys between stars alone, she explained softly. But it carries second meaning. Ethan leaned forward. What's that? When spoken during Shartala, it transforms, she said, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. What's Shartala? Neveleth hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Sacred moment when life's path diverts from extinction through intervention of another. In Viridian belief, souls become entwined when one prevents another's journey to the void. Ethan's expression darkened as comprehension dawned. What exactly does entwined mean in this context? You are now my Kethavanya, she stated simply. My eternal companion. Ethan nearly choked. Wait, like marriage? Neveleth nodded solemnly. That's... Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I was just helping an injured person. I didn't agree to any eternal bond. To you, perhaps, but to Viridian culture, this bond transcends consent. It exists in the fabric of existence, she explained. Her voice contained no judgment, only statement of fact. I should leave if this disturbs you, she added, studying his reaction. Ethan looked at her, her skin luminescent in the firelight, eyes reflecting depths he couldn't begin to fathom. Despite his protest, he found himself responding, No, don't go. I'm not disturbed, just adjusting. She nodded, understanding. Growth requires adaptation. They sat in companionable silence until she added, I do not expect affection that blooms spontaneously. Respect is foundation enough for beginning. Ethan studied her profile against the firelight. For the first time, he saw beyond her alien nature to recognize something fundamentally familiar. A being far from home, carrying traditions he didn't understand, yet somehow recognizable in all the ways that mattered. He rose and extended his hand. Come inside. You need rest to heal. Neveleth looked up at him, then accepted his hand. As their palms met, something unspoken passed between them, like distant stars gradually altering their orbits, moving closer without collision. The gravitational shift was subtle but undeniable. The tranquility of dawn shattered with the unmistakable vibration of approaching spacecraft. Ethan bolted awake, every military instinct screaming danger. The sound was unlike any Earth aircraft. A deep, resonant thrumming that penetrated the shelter walls and vibrated through his bones. He rushed outside, barefoot and alert. Descending from the cloud cover was a massive vessel that defied human engineering, obsidian and angular, resembling a crystalline arrowhead. It emitted no visible propulsion, no exhaust, just overwhelming presence as it hovered above the desert like a suspended mountain. Neveleth appeared beside him, her expression unreadable as she gazed at the ship. They've located me, she stated quietly. Your people? Ethan asked, tension evident in his voice. She nodded once. The sovereign fleet of Viridius. They recover their own. Ethan exhaled slowly. That's good, right? They can properly treat your injuries. Neveleth didn't answer, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying emotions her composed face concealed. By midday, the vessel had settled on the desert floor, its massive form casting long shadows across the sand. The ground trembled as a geometric aperture materialized in the hull, revealing a luminous interior. 6 figures emerged, moving with preternatural grace despite their imposing height and elaborate armor that seemed to shift colors with each movement, glyphs illuminating their surface in pulsating patterns. At their forefront walked an unmasked figure, male, his skin a deeper azure than Neveleth's, almost indigo, with eyes that glowed like molten gold. A cloak of material that appeared both solid and liquid draped his shoulders, moving with unnatural fluidity. Neveleth's voice dropped to a whisper. "That is Calum, my blood kin and once promised." Ethan glanced at her. "Your what?" "Long ago determined, never accepted by me," she clarified, tension evident in her stance. The delegation approached Ethan's shelter with measured steps. Calum halted upon seeing Neveleth, his expression remaining impassive though the air around him seemed to crackle with unspoken emotion. He addressed her in their native tongue, musical yet sharp, like crystal breaking. Neveleth responded with equal intensity, their exchange growing increasingly heated. Finally, Calum turned his attention to Ethan, switching to heavily accented English. "You are the terrestrial who interfered with cosmic order." Ethan crossed his arms defensively. "She was dying. I saved her life." Calum's golden eyes narrowed dangerously. "You have initiated the sacred Shartala and disrupted the harmony of cycles." Ethan looked to Neveleth. "What is he talking about?" She lowered her gaze. "Shartala isn't merely ceremonial. It is viridian cosmic law, the immutable pattern of existential balance when essence transfer occurs between beings." Calum stepped closer, his height forcing Ethan to look up. "You fractured a connection thousands of cycles in formation. The bond must now be completed or purified." "Purified?" Ethan's stomach tightened at the clinical detachment in Calum's voice. "Either you embrace the Sharvanya or Neveleth returns for essence dissolution. The process is irreversible. She will no longer maintain complete consciousness." Ethan looked at Neveleth, whose face had drained of color, not from fear, but from shame. "I will be considered void-touched," she whispered, "unworthy of ancestral connection." Ethan's anger flared. "So you're saying either I accept this bond or you essentially lobotomize her?" Neveleth turned away. "You owe me nothing. If you reject the bond, I will submit to dissolution with dignity." Something twisted in Ethan's core. This wasn't just alien cultural differences. This was cruelty masquerading as tradition. He stepped between Neveleth and Calum, his stance protective and defiant. "I'm not rejecting anything," he stated firmly. Calum's expression darkened. "Then you must prove your worthiness." Ethan met his gaze unflinchingly. "I had a feeling it wouldn't be that simple." Calum raised his hand, summoning a crystalline sphere that hovered above his palm, projecting a holographic display. The image showed two figures engaged in elaborate combat within a circle of luminous energy, surrounded by arcane symbols. "This is the Kethanarva," Calum explained. "No outsider has survived its completion." Ethan studied the projection, then looked at Neveleth. "If I succeed?" "You become viridian in essence, if not form," she answered, "forever bound to our ways." "And if I fail?" Her voice dropped to barely audible. "Your consciousness dissipates." Ethan took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Well, I've stared down death before. At least this time it comes with better special effects." As twilight descended, the desert transformed. Using technology beyond human comprehension, the Viridian created a vast ceremonial circle in the sand, its boundaries defined by energy that pulsed like liquid fire. Symbols hovered above the ground, emitting harmonic tones that resonated through the air. Ethan stood at the center, barefoot, stripped to the waist, holding only a ceremonial blade gifted by Calum, an elegant weapon with a crystalline edge that hummed softly against his skin. Neveleth watched from beyond the boundary, her expression taut with concern. Calum's voice carried across the arena. 3 trials await: endurance, cognition, and essence. Only by conquering all 3 may the Sharvanya be honored. Ethan tightened his grip on the blade. No pressure. The first trial commenced without warning. The ground beneath his feet transformed into a surface resembling burning embers interlaced with crackling energy fields. Each step sent shards of pain through his nervous system, yet he was required to traverse the circle while lifting crystalline structures that increased in mass with each moment. As he struggled, Microstorms of sand lashed his exposed skin like countless needles. When he completed the circuit, a biomechanical construct resembling a predatory creature materialized, attacking with artificial claws and emitting disorienting sonic pulses. Each time Ethan fell, he found his gaze drawn to Neveleth. Each time he forced himself upright again, driven by something beyond mere survival instinct. By the time the final trial approached, his body was a canvas of minor injuries. Cuts, burns, bruises mapping his journey. Yet he remained standing, breath ragged, but determination undiminished. Calum entered the circle, his expression betraying reluctant respect. The trial of essence. Face your deepest truth. If deception exists within you, the bond perishes. Ethan glanced around, expecting another physical challenge. Where's The circle erupted in blinding white light, in reality fractured around him. Ethan found himself confronting not external threats, but manifestations of his own psyche, his failures, regrets, the lives he couldn't save during combat, the darkness he carried within. His past surrounded him in visceral detail, accusing, demanding acknowledgement. But Ethan didn't retreat. He faced each specter, each memory, each shame. I am everything I've done, he acknowledged, but I'm not finished becoming who I am. The light receded gradually. Calum's expression hardened into reluctant acceptance as the symbols floating above the circle shifted from crimson to emerald. The bond had been validated by forces beyond mere cultural tradition. The night following the trials brought an unnatural stillness. The ceremonial circle remained intact, its symbols still hovering above the sand, pulsing with diminished light. The desert wind carried whispers that weren't quite sound, more like thoughts brushing against consciousness. Inside the shelter, Ethan sat beside the heating unit, methodically treating his injuries. His body bore testament to the trials, skin blistered from energy fields, muscles strained beyond normal endurance, cuts from the combat phase needing attention. Yet despite the physical toll, his mind remained sharp, focused. Neveleth sat across from him, watching with an expression he couldn't fully interpret. You should have failed, she said finally, her voice soft. Ethan glanced up, a wry smile touching his lips. Thanks for the vote of confidence. That is not my meaning, she clarified. The Kethanarva responds to essence truth. It destroys fabrication. Most humans. She hesitated. Their internal contradictions consume them when exposed. Ethan continued bandaging his arm. I stopped lying to myself a long time ago. Turns out almost dying does wonders for your self-honesty. Before Neveleth could respond, the air vibrated with new energy. Ethan moved to the entrance, Neveleth following closely. Above them, the clouds parted as 4 sleek vessels descended, smaller than the sovereign vessel, but distinctly different in design. Unlike the obsidian angularity of Calum's ship, these crafts gleamed with iridescent surfaces, their forms reminiscent of aquatic predators, cutting through the atmosphere with impossible precision. They arranged themselves in perfect formation around Ethan's shelter, creating a protective perimeter. Then a 5th vessel appeared, larger than the escorts, its hull adorned with complex patterns that shifted like liquid mathematics, glowing with azure and gold luminescence. Neveleth's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her body tensed, her breathing quickened, her luminescence dimmed in what Ethan now recognized as fear. No, she whispered, not the ascendancy, not now. Ethan turned to her. Who are they? She didn't answer, transfixed as the magnificent vessel touched down with impossible gentleness. A portal materialized in its side, revealing a figure that emerged like living artwork. She stood nearly 9 feet tall, her proportions both familiar and alien, humanoid yet beyond human. Her skin resembled polished obsidian with subtle undertones of deep purple that shifted with her movements. Her attire wasn't merely clothing, but a symbiotic extension of herself, flowing robes that seemed woven from captured starlight, moving with conscious grace. Around her head orbited crystalline fragments that formed a corona of suspended geometry, each piece pulsing with inner light. Her eyes radiated golden energy, not merely reflecting light, but generating it. Neveleth dropped to one knee immediately. The Ascendant Prime, she whispered reverently, sovereign of the eternal harmony. Ethan stared, trying to process what he was seeing. She's your ruler? No, Neveleth responded, her voice barely audible. Worse, she is custodian of genetic sovereignty, guardian of viridian purity. She rejects all cross-species harmony. The Ascendant Prime approached with fluid grace, her voice resonating not through air, but directly into their minds, layered with harmonics that conveyed meaning beyond mere words. Bring forth the terrestrial, she commanded. The Viridian guards moved toward Ethan, but he stepped forward voluntarily. I'm right here, he stated, refusing to show intimidation despite the overwhelming presence before him. The Ascendant studied him with unnerving intensity, her luminous gaze seeming to penetrate beyond physical form. You have completed the Kethnarva. You bear the essence mark of Shartehla. Her mental voice carried neither approval nor condemnation, merely observation. Yet you remain external to the harmony. Ethan maintained eye contact despite the discomfort it caused. If you're here to dissolve this bond, you're too late. No, she responded. I am here to determine if your consciousness warrants continued existence. The atmosphere darkened perceptibly. Clouds gathered with unnatural speed. The sand beneath their feet began to rise in spiraling patterns, responding to invisible energy currents. Ethan leaned toward Neveleth, his voice low. What's happening? Neveleth's luminescence dimmed further. She summons the veil of discernment. She will examine your essence pattern against the template of harmony. If dissonance is found, your consciousness will be extinguished. Before Ethan could respond, the Ascendant raised one elongated hand. A beam of soft radiance extended from her palm, connecting with Ethan's chest. Initially painless, the sensation quickly transformed into agony. Not physical, but existential, as though his very identity was being unraveled thread by thread. His memories, emotions, and deepest thoughts were extracted and examined, leaving him raw and exposed. He collapsed to one knee, blood trickling from his nose, his mind fracturing at the edges. Then abruptly the light withdrew. Ethan gasped, struggling to reorient himself in reality. The Ascendant Prime stood motionless, her expression altered, showing something akin to astonishment, an emotion apparently rare for her kind. This defies probability, she stated, her mental voice carrying new harmonics of uncertainty. Ethan forced himself to stand, though his legs threatened to buckle. What does? Your essence pattern, she replied. It resonates with the primordial template, the original harmonic structure before the Great Divergence, before the Viridian ascended beyond biological limitation. Neveleth stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. You mean he carries echoes of the ancestral form? The Ascendant inclined her head slightly. He is not merely terrestrial. He is reflection, a genetic memory of what we were before transcendence, before we forgot our origins. Ethan looked between them, frustration mounting. Can someone explain what that means in terms I can understand? Neveleth turned to him, wonder evident in her expression. It means you're more viridian than we are. You carry patterns we lost during evolution. The Sharavanya cannot be severed, the Ascendant declared, turning away. Not through tradition or decree, but through cosmic resonance. Your patterns form completion. As she moved toward her vessel, she paused, adding words that sent a chill through Ethan. Others will perceive this union differently. The purifiers will see abomination where we see reflection. The sovereign harmony itself may fracture over this revelation. Prepare yourselves. The ships ascended into the atmosphere, disappearing with impossible speed, leaving only silence and unanswered questions in their wake. Ethan stood beside Neveleth in the desert stillness, processing the implications of what had just occurred. He glanced at her. So I'm basically space royalty now? She smiled, the tension finally breaking. Not royalty, just potentially evolutionary significant. That's worse, he replied, but they both laughed, the sound carrying across the empty landscape. A momentary respite before the storm gathering on the horizon, one that neither Earth nor the stars had anticipated. In the days following the Ascendant's departure, Ethan noticed subtle changes in his environment. The desert, once a sanctuary of silence, now carried whispers at the edge of perception. Voices that weren't quite voices, sounds that existed in the space between thought and reality. The night sky seemed more alive, stars pulsing with rhythms that suggested consciousness rather than mere celestial mechanics. Nevelith sat on an outcropping of rock outside the shelter, her posture serene but her fingers betraying subtle tremors. Ethan joined her, noting the distant expression in her amber eyes. "You feel it too," he said, not a question but an acknowledgement. She nodded slowly. "The veil thins." Ethan frowned. "The what?" She turned to him, her gaze intensely focused. "The membrane between consciousness and manifestation, between intention and reality." Ethan sighed heavily. "Great. First I survive your cultural rituals, then get approved by your space empress, and now I'm experiencing cosmic hallucinations." Nevelith didn't share his attempt at humor. "You are being summoned once more," she explained softly. "Not by Viridian tradition, not by political authority, but by the primal pattern itself." Ethan crossed his arms defensively. "And that means what exactly?" "The fundamental structure of existence wishes to verify your worthiness for the Sharvanya, not through physical trials, but through essence resonance." That night, Ethan didn't merely sleep, his consciousness transferred. He found himself suspended in a dimension that defied physical laws, a void of absolute darkness, yet simultaneously illuminated, where he floated without falling while standing on surfaces made of solidified light. Cosmic wheels of stars rotated around him like the mechanics of some vast clock, whispers echoing from all directions. A figure materialized before him, himself but fundamentally altered. This doppelganger wore military armor from his past, his face younger but hardened by violence, eyes cold with ruthless calculation. This phantom self drew a weapon that glowed with inner malevolence, speaking in a voice like frozen metal. "You chose withdrawal. You chose surrender. You chose her. You believe compassion brings strength." Ethan tensed, prepared for combat. "You think violence makes you authentic." "No," the shadow self replied. "It made me necessary." The confrontation that followed transcended physical combat. With each engagement, Ethan was forced to relive his darkest moments. The civilians he couldn't protect, the comrades lost under his command, the moral compromises made in the name of survival. Each memory struck with the force of physical trauma, yet he neither retreated nor denied their reality. "I contain all of this," he acknowledged, voice steady despite the pain. "But I've continued beyond it." The construct of his past shattered into particles of golden light, dissolving into the void. But the trial continued as another figure emerged from the darkness. Nevelith, but transformed by grief, her form diminished, wounded by abandonment. "You will forsake me," this phantom Nevelith accused, indigo tears streaming down her azure face. "When your world reclaims you, when your species offers acceptance, the Shirvanya will become inconvenient." Ethan approached this apparition, recognizing the fear beneath the accusation. "You're not just someone I rescued. You're someone I've chosen," he stated with quiet certainty. "The planet beneath my feet doesn't change that." The false Nevelith dissolved into cascading light, and Ethan awakened in his shelter, pulse racing, consciousness expanded. Nevelith sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his forehead, her expression one of wonder and relief. "You traversed the pattern void," she whispered, "and returned intact." Ethan struggled to orient himself, the experience still resonating through his being. "I didn't fight monsters this time." "You confronted yourself," she replied. "A greater challenge than any external threat." The Kethnarva tested physical worthiness. The pattern void verified essence compatibility. Before Ethan could respond, an alert sounded from the communication console Nevelith had connected to her people's network. She moved swiftly to check it, her posture stiffening as she examined the display. "What is it?" Ethan asked, sensing her concern. "Your world," she replied, turning the screen toward him. The display showed satellite imagery of the crash site overlaid with military targeting parameters. An audio transmission played through the speakers, partially encrypted but clear enough. "Anomalous vessel confirmed. Site secured. Operation Stellar Containment and commences in 14 hours. Ethan's blood ran cold. "They're coming." Nevelith met his gaze, understanding dawning. This transcends personal connection. Your authorities perceive me as threat or asset. Ethan rose, determination replacing fatigue. They'll try to take you, study you, maybe worse. What will you do? She asked quietly. Ethan's expression hardened. I've passed your trials. Now we face mine. Dawn painted the desert in shades of amber and gold, but the serenity masked growing tension. Ethan stood atop a dune, scanning the horizon where black specks gradually materialized against the pale sky. Earth military transport aircraft, approaching with methodical precision. Neveleth stood beside him, no longer wearing borrowed clothing, but dressed in restored Viridian ceremonial armor. The silver-blue plates across her shoulders and chest caught the morning light, while symbols etched into the material pulsed with subtle energy. From her waist flowed a sash covered in luminous glyphs that shifted and changed like living calligraphy. They will attempt to separate us, she observed quietly. Ethan nodded grimly. They can try. She studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. If violence erupts, will you fight your own kind? Ethan paused, weighing his answer carefully. Only if they threaten you. Within the hour, the aircraft landed, kicking up massive clouds of sand as rotors stirred the air. From the largest transport emerged a contingent of soldiers in advanced tactical gear. Weapons raised, faces concealed behind polarized visors. They moved with disciplined precision, establishing a perimeter around Ethan's shelter. Ethan stepped forward, hands raised non-threateningly. You're late to the party. I saved her days ago. One soldier advanced, lowering his visor to reveal a face Ethan recognized from his military past. Ethan Cormac, former Special Reconnaissance, honorably discharged. You are harboring an extraterrestrial entity classified as biohazard level alpha. Stand down and surrender the alien immediately. And then what? Ethan challenged. Dissection, interrogation, weapons research? The soldier didn't respond, but another figure emerged from the transport, a woman in her 50s wearing the insignia of military intelligence, her posture radiating authority. Director Vega, Ethan acknowledged, surprised. She approached with calculated confidence. You always did have a talent for finding exceptional trouble, Cormac. Ethan's expression hardened. She's not a threat. That determination isn't yours to make, Vega countered smoothly. She's an unknown biological entity with technology centuries beyond our capability, who crash-landed near a former Special Forces operative and has now formed some kind of bond with you. Her eyes narrowed. That doesn't suggest peaceful intentions. It suggests infiltration. Neveleth stepped forward, her voice calm but resonant. I seek harmony, not conflict. Vega studied her with clinical detachment. Yet your kind arrived in stealth, crashed conveniently near military-trained personnel, and established what you call a bond through means you've inadequately explained. She shook her head. Those aren't the actions of peaceful visitors. You're not listening, Ethan interjected, frustration mounting. She was escaping her own people. The crash wasn't planned. The bond wasn't calculated. It was... Vega raised her hand sharply, and instantly every weapon in the perimeter aimed directly at Neveleth. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The wind ceased, particles of sand suspended in midair. The Sharavanya connection in Ethan's consciousness pulsed with sudden intensity. He moved instinctively, positioning himself before Neveleth, arms extended protectively. You shoot her, you shoot me, he stated, voice low and dangerous. A subtle humming rose from the air surrounding them. Neveleth's armor began to emit increasing luminescence, the symbols on her sash burning with golden intensity, etching corresponding patterns into the sand beneath their feet. Then, without warning, reality fractured. The ground split with a thunderous crack, a pulse of energy radiating outward in concentric circles, knocking the soldiers off their feet. Weapons flew from hands, communication devices sparked and failed. At the epicenter stood Ethan and Neveleth, untouched by the disruption. The sky above rippled like disturbed water, and a beam of pure silver energy descended from nowhere, enveloping them in a double helix of symbols and light. This wasn't aggression but activation, the Sharavanya bond manifesting its full potential at the moment of greatest need. In orbit above Earth, the Viridian vessel stirred to life, responding to an ancient signal encoded in reality itself, older than either species, transcending mere cultural tradition. The completed bond transmitted across space, triggering recognition patterns dormant for millennia. Back on Earth, the soldiers stared in mingled awe and trepidation as the energy field gradually dissipated. Ethan and Nevelith remained standing, hands clasped, surrounded by glyphs etched permanently into the desert floor. Nevelith addressed the stunned military personnel, her voice carrying new authority. The Sharvanya is completed beyond ceremonial acknowledgement. What the primal pattern has joined cannot be severed by temporal authority. Director Vega remained standing, though visibly shaken. What was that? Ethan met her gaze steadily. Something bigger than either of our government's security classifications. Vega studied them both for a long moment, calculation evident behind her eyes. Then, with obvious reluctance, she signaled the soldiers to lower their weapons. "This isn't over, Cormac," she stated coldly. "You've just placed yourself between worlds, and neither will fully trust you now." Ethan's expression remained impassive. "I've made my choice." Vega turned and walked toward the transport, pausing only briefly. "Watch your periphery. The battle for control of what she represents has only begun." That evening, as stars emerged in the desert sky, Ethan and Nevelith sat beside the fire pit, the flames casting flickering shadows across their faces. Above them, the cosmos seemed somehow more attentive, stars pulsing with subtle rhythms that suggested awareness. "You didn't need to complete the Sharvanyaim," Nevelith said quietly, watching embers rise toward the heavens. Ethan looked at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Yes, I did." "Why?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Because no one's ever called me Kethavanya before, and I've never terrified two civilizations simultaneously just by holding someone's hand." Neveleth's laughter came unexpectedly, musical and bright, as she leaned against his shoulder. In that moment, they weren't representatives of different species, but pioneers of something unprecedented, a connection that resonated through the fabric of existence itself, potentially reshaping the future neither could fully envision. The world did not end in apocalyptic conflict. No Viridian armada appeared to reclaim their lost daughter. No government strike teams descended to seize the alien visitor. Instead, an unnatural silence fell over the desert. 3 days of absolute stillness, as though the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next movement in a cosmic dance neither human nor Viridian fully comprehended. "Something's coming," Ethan stated grimly on the third evening, checking his rifle more from habit than practical purpose. Nevelith stood at the edge of the dune, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon, her form silhouetted against the setting sun. "No," she whispered. "Something is already here." That night, Ethan awakened to an unfamiliar sound, not threatening, not mechanical, but deeply affecting. Soft weeping came from the far side of the shelter. He turned to find Nevelith curled against the wall, arms wrapped protectively around her midsection, her eyes emitting heightened luminescence as tears tracked down her azure skin. "Nevelith!" Alarmed, he moved quickly to her side. She looked up, her expression not of pain, but of wonder mixed with trepidation. "Something has transformed," she whispered. Concern flooded through him. "Are you injured? What's wrong?" She shook her head slowly. "Not injured, awakened." She reached for his hand, guiding it gently to rest against her abdomen. Ethan remained motionless, confused until he felt it. A subtle vibration beneath his palm, not rhythmic like a heartbeat, not mechanical like technology, but something unique. A presence, new, alive, impossibly real. Understanding dawned, and Ethan found himself laughing softly in astonishment. "The Sharvanya created life," Nevelith explained, her own tears continuing to fall freely. "The pattern has manifested physically." Ethan struggled to find words, his mind racing through implications he'd never considered possible. "I didn't think our species would be compatible." Nevelith nodded, her hand joining his over her abdomen. In Viridian archives, conception through Sharvanya exists only in ancestral mythology. No child has emerged from bond completion since the great divergence millennia ago. Ethan leaned back, processing this revelation. So we're having a miracle baby that breaks the laws of biology and thousands of years of your people's evolution. Perfect. I can already picture the scientific community's reaction. But beneath his sarcastic response, a strange emotion took root. Not fear, not confusion, but something he hadn't felt since before his military service. Hope. The following morning, the prolonged silence shattered with the arrival of a vessel unlike any previously encountered. Unlike the sleek predatory designs of the sovereign fleet or the mathematically perfect form of the ascendancy, this craft appeared ancient, its hull weathered by cosmic travel, surface etched with hieroglyphs so old they predated written language, emitting a discordant hum like the dying breath of a forgotten star. Neveleth's reaction was immediate, her luminescence dimming drastically. "The primal arbiters," she whispered, voice tight with apprehension. Ethan glanced at her, tension gathering in his shoulders. "That name doesn't sound particularly welcoming." "They are not welcome anywhere," she replied. "They observe the boundaries of cosmic law. They manifest only when fundamental patterns face disruption." Ethan grabbed his jacket, a futile gesture of preparation. "Let me guess, they heard about our little miracle." The vessel didn't land conventionally but hovered at an impossible angle, as though partially existing in dimensions beyond normal perception. A vertical fissure appeared in reality itself, and through this impossible doorway descended a being that defied categorization. It possessed no discernible face, only a mask of what appeared to be petrified stardust, carved with symbols that predated language itself. Its form was concealed within robes that moved without wind, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Where it passed, reality itself seemed to bend slightly, adjusting to accommodate its presence. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself slightly ahead of Neveleth. "We didn't seek this situation," he stated firmly. The Arbiter's response came not as sound, but as thought directly implanted into their consciousness, its mental voice resonating with harmonics that suggested countless ages of observation. "The Sharavanya has manifested beyond parameter. Life emerges where division was established. You have transformed law through connection." Ethan clenched his jaw, fighting the disorientation caused by the direct mental communication. "So what happens now? You erase us from existence?" Silence stretched for several heartbeats before the Arbiter responded, "No, we observe to learn." The entity drifted closer, stopping several meters from the couple. A spherical object materialized from within its robes, hovering between them. A perfect orb that pulsed with inner light, like a miniature star contained within translucent boundaries. "Place your connected hands upon the chronosphere and permit revelation." Ethan glanced at Neveleth, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Together they extended their hands, fingers intertwining as they made contact with the sphere's surface. Blinding illumination erupted from the point of contact, flooding their consciousness with visions beyond individual perspective. A galaxy fractured by ancient fears, civilizations separated by laws established when the stars were young, species evolving along divergent paths enforced through cosmic regulation. And at the center of this tapestry of division, a single figure emerged, a child with skin that shimmered between azure and human tones, eyes that contained both stars and earth, extending hands simultaneously toward Viridian and human representatives, creating bridges where walls had stood for millennia. The vision faded gradually, leaving them breathless and shaken. The Arbiter retrieved the sphere, which had dimmed to a soft glow. "The pattern shifts," it communicated. "What was forbidden by decree must now be permitted by necessity. The dividing lines between consciousness forms require recalibration." Without further explanation, the entity retreated toward its vessel. As it departed, the air pressure normalized. Cosmic whispers faded, and reality itself seemed to exhale in relief. Neveleth stared after the disappearing craft. "It granted recognition," she whispered in disbelief. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It gave us permission to exist." Days expanded into weeks as news of their union spread through both worlds. Among the Viridian, the tale of a human who successfully completed Shartala circulated like wildfire, interpretations ranging from cosmic aberration to fulfillment of ancestral prophecy. Earth's authorities maintained distance but constant surveillance. No further military confrontations occurred, but orbital satellites adjusted their trajectories to maintain persistent observation, monitoring every movement and interaction while maintaining uncertain neutrality. One afternoon, Neveleth sat cross-legged in the sand, drawing complex mathematical patterns with her fingertip. The subtle curvature of her abdomen had become more pronounced, her luminescence intensifying with the developing life within. Ethan joined her, carrying a partially assembled device constructed from salvaged components. "What are you building?" she asked, studying the intricate circuitry. "A transmission array," he replied, connecting delicate filaments. "One that can communicate in frequencies both your people and mine can interpret. I want our story documented accurately." Neveleth tilted her head slightly. "Why is this important to you?" Ethan paused, looking toward the horizon where the sun painted the sky in deepening crimson. "Because someday our child will ask who we were before they existed, and I want both worlds to have already heard the answer." As the months passed, the once barren shelter transformed. Ethan expanded the structure, adding rooms using materials delivered secretly by sympathetic military contacts who believed the connection between human and Viridian represented hope rather than threat. Neveleth enhanced these ordinary materials with Viridian technology, creating a dwelling that existed between worlds, neither fully Earth nor alien, but a new synthesis. Their child grew rapidly, the pregnancy progressing differently than either human or Viridian standard. Neveleth's body glowed with increasing intensity, cosmic energy patterns flowing beneath her skin in complex geometries that matched the mathematical symbols she continued to draw in the sand each day. Not artistic expression, but instinctive mapping of the new consciousness forming within. 6 months after the bond's completion, Earth scientists detected unusual energy patterns emanating from the desert compound. Military satellites captured images of light phenomena that defied conventional physics, geometric formations of pure energy that appeared and disappeared around their dwelling, creating momentary doorways between dimensions before collapsing back into quantum potentiality. Director Vega returned, this time without soldiers but with a team of scientists. Ethan met them at the perimeter, protective but not hostile. "You're monitoring unusual energy signatures," he stated, not a question. Vega nodded. "Your child is affecting reality at the quantum level. We need to understand what's happening." "Understanding doesn't require control," Ethan replied firmly. A subtle standoff ensued until Neveleth emerged from the dwelling, her pregnancy now visibly advanced, her body emanating soft radiance that intensified with each step. The scientists' instruments reacted immediately, readings fluctuating wildly. "The child speaks through pattern," she explained calmly. "It communicates in the language of the universe itself." One scientist stepped forward, a woman with compassionate eyes. "We want to help ensure your safety. All 3 of you. This is unprecedented territory." Neveleth studied her, then nodded once. "You may observe, but from a distance. The pattern is sensitive to interference." A compromise was reached. Observation posts established beyond the energy field's perimeter, sharing data with both Earth authorities and Viridian observers who maintained a discrete presence in distant orbit. As the birth approached, cosmic phenomena intensified. The stars above their dwelling rearranged themselves subtly each night, forming configurations not seen in Earth's sky for millennia. The desert itself responded, ancient seeds dormant for centuries suddenly germinating, creating a circle of vegetation around their home. Plants with properties that defied botanical classification, existing somewhere between Earth flora and something entirely new. The night the child arrived, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The sky cleared of clouds, stars pulsed in synchronous rhythm, and the sand beneath their dwelling transformed into crystalline patterns that conducted pure energy. Inside, Neveleth's body became a vessel of light, the birth process transcending physical limitations. When their daughter finally arrived, skin shimmering with subtle patterns that shifted between human tones and azure luminescence, eyes containing depths beyond infant awareness, both Earth and the stars witnessed the emergence of something unprecedented. Not merely a hybrid of species, but the physical embodiment of connection itself, a bridge across cosmic division that had been maintained for reasons long forgotten. They named her Alicia, from the light, acknowledging both her luminous nature and the hope she represented. As Ethan held her for the first time, he felt the weight not just of parenthood, but of cosmic significance. A responsibility that extended beyond their small family to the future of understanding between worlds. Yet in that moment, looking down at her perfectly formed features, the subtle curve of her ears revealing Viridian heritage, the warmth of her smile purely human, none of the cosmic implications mattered. She was simply their daughter, a miracle born of compassion rather than calculation, of connection rather than control. "Welcome to both worlds," he whispered, "and to the new one you'll help create." In distant reaches of space, various powers observed these developments with reactions ranging from wonder to alarm. Some saw abomination, others salvation, but all recognized that the universe had shifted irreversibly toward new possibility, all because one human chose to save a stranger among stars.